Welcome to this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live, the show which ensures that you profit from your time spent here with experts, either through their industry insights, information, or simply learning from them. And today we have Previn Pillay. He's a seasoned mining and resource expert, founder and CEO of Pyromin Consulting. He has over 2 decades of global experience as a chemical engineer, metallurgist, and operations leader. And he's passionate about advancing the mining industry's role in sustainable resources stewardship. Welcome to the show, Previn.
Ajay, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
You are welcome. Welcome to the show, Previn. Welcome to India in this online form. And I'm sure
Wonderful to
not
be here.
just in India, but a lot of people across the globe will benefit from what we are going to talk right now. We'll talk about the mining industry, we'll talk about resources industry, all in this backdrop under leadership beyond boundaries, and everything will come. We'll
Wonderful.
talk about all that. But before that, let's talk about you a bit more, Previn,
Sure.
so that you know about your journey, about your background, so that the audience knows a little bit more who actually
Sure.
they are listening to.
Ajay, thank you so much for that introduction. Really appreciate it. And just to share a bit about myself, I'm from South Africa, born and raised. I've spent approximately 2 decades working in the mining industry in South Africa, as well as in the Middle East and now in Australia. So I live in Australia for approximately 2.5 years. Now I came over to Australia with my family in 2022 for a greenfield project. I've had the privilege of working in the Middle East as well. I lived and worked in Oman for about 3 years. And over the course of the last 7 years of my career, I've worked in major projects in the mining industry, basically building mines and process plants in different parts of the world. As of the start of this year, I started my own consulting firm, Pyromin Consulting. And what we do is offer operational excellence to mining and resources companies. So we basically get into mining companies and revamp their operational programs to increase the profit and throughput of their production plants.
Right, right. So a bit about your journey, from an engineer to being, at a senior level, being an executive,
Sure,
and then you talk about sustainability, innovation, and
sure,
cultural understanding in the resource industry.
sure.
Previn, do you actually think people have time for all these things to listen, or is it all about the stock market, the companies, the money, the profits? I want to understand
Le-
that aspect from you.
Look, that's a good question. Thanks for asking that. And to be honest, I think we definitely have time to discuss those things now in the industry. There has been a significant shift in the mining industry over the last decade, especially the last 5 years, where the industry has started to take things like sustainability a lot more seriously. And we see that now in terms of decarbonization, for example, in the mining industry. And we see certain big companies in the mining industry that are making strides towards decarbonizing their operations. Just to give you some examples, BHP, which is the world's largest mining company, has implemented things like autonomous trucks, for example, on some of their mine sites. Rio Tinto, another huge mining company, has done a similar thing as well. And I do understand that the mining industry is what we describe as a small industry, and outside of the mining industry, people generally see it as an industry that's very old school, very much still focused on profits and harming the environment as well. And part of my work in the industry is trying to change that narrative around mining and trying to educate the general population as well about the positive work that's happening in the mining industry.
Absolutely, absolutely, Praveen. Now, let's look at it from that point of view. You talk about, aligning resource extraction with environmental responsibility and long term value creation.
Yeah.
How? How will the mining industry do it? I want to understand because every time, is it easy to do? I know a lot of people, even in the mining industry, they are serious about it, but there are
Mhm.
challenges also. So I want to understand first, then even if there is seriousness, people are good, why does almost every mining project gets into controversy? Help us understand in that backdrop with this whole vision of your resource extraction with environmental responsibility and long-term value creation. Value creation for
Excellent
whom?
question. Excellent question. Thanks for asking that. And look, I do understand that there's obviously a certain stigma, let me put it that way, a certain stigma around mining. And what I see happening in the industry now is a lot of work in terms of putting out the right messaging about the industry and the work that's happening in the industry. There's also been a lot of work put into raising the standards around mining operations and how we manage operations. Just to share with you, there were a few disasters that took place a decade ago and over the last 10 years in South America, for example, where there was a tailings dam failure, a very serious tailings dam failure that happened in South America, which ended up costing that company billions and billions of dollars in terms of damage to reputation, as well as reparations to communities that were affected. And so I do understand when you put the shoe on the other foot, that people might think, well, the mining industry is not going to be able to extract resources responsibly because of the damage that's already been done. But what happened after those tailings dam disasters was the mining industry as a global community got together and put a lot of work into developing things like the GISTM, which is the global industry standard for tailings management. And that was a massive piece of work that went into governing how tailings facilities are managed by mining companies around the world. Now, that's just one aspect of the mining value chain. But coming back to your point about responsible resource extraction and environmental care, a part of that process involves taking care of the environmental aspects from the start. So, what I mean by that is when we are actually setting out to develop a project or to build a mining project, from the beginning, from the get go, we bring in the right environmental people. We do the right environmental work in terms of permitting, in terms of environmental impact assessment, for example. So there's a lot more focus on those areas. There's a lot of updates in terms of the standards and the regulations that govern those pieces of work. And I think now we're in a much better shape than where we were 10 years ago and even 5 years ago. I think we're in a much better shape now. It still can get better, and I think there's ongoing work that's happening behind the scenes to keep improving the standards in terms of how we develop these projects. I'm not saying that we're there yet. We're not. We still have work to do, but it is a lot better than what it was 5 years ago.
Absolutely, much better than what it was, but then the shape of the planet is not good. The climate change, the climate action, everywhere people have also have become much more aware. But to be
Yeah.
fair to the business people, the mining industry, all the resource people, generation, let's understand their challenges. We understand everyone is good. All business
Yes.
people, maybe they want to make some a bit more profit or
Yeah.
whatever it is. But if we forget that for a bit, let's understand that they really want to do good. Why is it? What are the biggest challenges for these people? Is it that only about some profit, or is it that there are genuine challenges on the ground? Almost everyone finds that they are the best hunting ground in terms of extortion, in terms of
Yeah.
money, either from political side, even for
Yes.
civil rights group. All those people
Mhm.
who are nearby, for them this is the best play. Go take some flags, make some protest, and the money will start flowing. It help us
Yeah.
understand from every
Yeah.
aspect, just to get that side of story, whichever part of the world.
Yeah. So look, that you raised some really good points there, and that is the case right now as well. That when you are trying to do these projects, one of the big factors that companies and investors look at is where is the project located, right? And there are what we call tier one jurisdictions. Tier one jurisdictions are areas that are seen as safe to build a project in, and then there are other jurisdictions where you have issues that come into play. And some of them you've touched on already around, governments that may not be favorable, for example, to building a project. and local regulations that may make it more complex, for example, to get a project permitted and approved. I think also, if you look at the project development timeline for mining projects over the last decade, it's gotten longer and longer. I just came off a project at the end of last year, and that project was actually in development for over 8 years. So the resource was discovered about 15 years ago, and nothing much was done with it. And then when a company got a hold of it, they decided to start doing more geological work on that resource and start developing it. But the biggest factors behind why it took so long was the examples that you just mentioned now. There was a social aspect to it where the local communities around that area were not they were not for that project, basically, and there were concerns that came in, and a lot of valid concerns as well. And I think as an industry, what we need to do is engage the stakeholders from the beginning, engage all of the stakeholders involved from the beginning, and get the right voices in the room to hear the concerns, and then work actively together, proactively and collaboratively, to actually address those concerns. And that is what we did on the project that I just came off, which was the Thunderbird Mineral Sands project in Western Australia. We actually got the right people in the room, and we had discussions, lengthy discussions, several rounds of meetings, for example. But at the end, we managed to sort everything out. But again, you made some very valid points there. It is a complex area to operate in. And what I've seen happening is that there's a number of resources that are found throughout the world. And I see it all the time, Ajay, on LinkedIn. I see announcements by people, by geologists who have found, whether it be copper or gold or some other metal in the ground. And they say, well, it's a really great resource and we want to develop it. And then what happens is it becomes a really narrow funnel. And of those, let's say 100 projects that are found, only 5 may go to the next stage of saying, let's actually develop it. And out of that 5, only 2 may be successful. I think part of the reason for that is because we are, because we are making projects more detailed, more stringent, more compliant, they are more complex to execute. So it's not easy to actually build a project. It's quite complex. And you've got to have the right people in place, but you've also got to have the right timing. And the other part to that, I would say, is the global economy as a whole. If you look at what happened during COVID, for example, that caused a repression in terms of the economy. Investors became a bit scared to invest and pulled back. More recently, we've seen things like the Russia and Ukraine conflict, for example, and other global conflicts and political issues that have taken place around the world. And all these things have an impact on investors. And when investors become more, let's say, reluctant to spend their money or put their money forward, I've seen numerous good mining projects that when you look at them on paper, technically they are sound, they are really good projects. But what happens is, because of the global economy as a whole, people become scared to invest in those projects and they pull back, and then the project gets canned. And what happens is it gets mothballed, and sometimes maybe 5 years later, someone says, okay, let's go back and look at that. And then it gets picked up. So it's a complex playing field, I guess that's what I'm saying.
Right. But then business is business. You use all the predictions, all the resources at your disposal, and look at. You would look at the skies with all the things you have, like the Hubble telescope and then the Webb telescope. All will show different things. So whatever you invest in resources, you try to look at businesses, and that is where you earn. You take risk, you earn profit. But one thing I
That's right.
want to understand is that on the ground, people who are around that site, they have genuine concerns. Many projects, why is it that they are not taking care of the genuine demands or genuine things of the people? And then there is the political side, that some vested interest will obviously come in. Why is it that the companies seem to be talking more to the vested interests, and then the people who are actually affected by the project negatively, they have to actually take to different recourse, different ways of protest? Is it that the companies do not pay enough attention to or listen to the voices for the ground, and that they are not putting enough effort to it, and let's everything gets lost in translation, and all they have to do is that reactive gestures, not
Yeah.
positive gestures.
Yeah.
How should they tackle it? Means how will you teach them? They're not small people. You can't say they don't have
Yeah.
resources. they
Yeah.
are they have enough resources, the biggest
That's right.
resources possible. Why is it that most of the time they fail? You can't say general people are all politically motivated, especially when they are dying, when they have problems, when they are losing eyesight, when they are losing their health, when they are facing, all the pollution created. Even a small builder who builds a project, they know how to take those preventive measures so that the
Mhm.
dust is taken care of. Why can't these people do it? That is where it asks a lot of questions. How will you quell these questions from the minds of the people?
So, look, that's a fantastic question, and I've seen that myself. And one of the reasons I believe, and look, this is just coming from me, as my personal opinion, because I've been, like I said, privileged to work in projects on three different continents now. And I think one of the big factors that we are becoming more aware of in the industry is appreciating local cultures and understanding local cultures and being able to speak to people at their level, but also to speak to people in their language. And where I learned this the hard way was when I lived in the Middle East in Oman, and I went over there in 2018 for a Greenfield project, and I assumed that because everybody speaks English, we all understand one another. But what I quickly discovered was that everybody speaks a different kind of English in different parts of the world. And I often had the experience that I would speak to people and communicate to people, for example, give instructions to people to do certain things. And when I'd come back later at the end of the day, I'd find that they'd done something completely different. And when I had a conversation with people to understand what happened, they would actually relate back to me what I'd said to them and then give me their interpretation. And that's how I realized that a simple thing like just the way we communicate to people and the language that we use, the words that we use, is so vital. It's so important because we have to understand that everybody perceives the language in a different way. And so when we are doing these sort of projects, I think that's a very important factor that we can actually capture and we can use to our advantage. Because, for example, if we have, let's say, an Australian company that's trying to do a project in Africa, in some part of Africa, you've got to go in with the mindset that you have to understand and meet with the local people first. Get people on your side that are able to speak to the local people in their language as well and be able to understand them culturally, not just understand them as local residents or as political players or whatever it is, but you can understand them culturally. And the only way to do that, I find, is to actually become a part of their community. You've got to live amongst them, you've got to be a part of the community, understand the challenges that they go through, how do they see life. And when you actually do that, when you demonstrate that you are willing to come in and not just come there and build a project and say, okay, we want to take something out of the ground and make profit, but we actually want to be a part of this community. That's when people actually become engaged and they appreciate you much more. And that makes it a lot easier to actually talk to the right stakeholders in the right way and get the conversations flowing to get the projects built.
Right, right, Previn. Let's now look at the solution providers, the leadership. They can
Yeah.
bring the solution. Again, leadership is very important, and they are the top leaders from top business schools, from top experiences, and all those people. They either from the headquarters, then on the base camp, and then on the project level. You get the best people.
Yeah.
Why is it that they are not able to solve the problem? Is it that there is a leadership problem? Who is the leadership here? Is it the project leader? Is it the investor here? Is it the CEO? Is it the board of directors? Who is the leader that we talk about? Who calls the shots here? Because problem is forces everyone to come down and talk,
Yeah.
but they don't talk. Solution is not reached.
So the leaders will be the C-suite. So the CEO, for example, and the other C-suite leaders of the company, of the mining company or the exploration company. But also it will be the project people. So the project director, for example, that's working with the company to build the project. Because those, and why I say that is because those are the faces of the company that the community sees, that the public sees on a regular basis, and they represent the company. So and you touched on some really good points there about you've got really high caliber people who've got qualifications from different parts of the world. They've got really high qualifications. On paper, of course, they tick all of the boxes. They've got everything that's required to actually go in and do all of this sort of work. But to be honest with you, what I've learned the hard way in terms of the cultural nuance, these things are not taught in any degree anywhere. There's no MBA degree or master's or doctorate that you can do anywhere that's going to teach you how to connect with people and communicate with people and understand culture. That's a lived experience. That's something that you can only do when you put your boots on the ground in the local community and get to know people. So there's no classroom teaching that can replace that.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that is why, Praveen, you who has seen the apartheid era, who has seen things on the ground, who has got the mental fortitude to see all these things and actually get things going, these are the type of people we need it. Not somebody who is talking, who is looking very great on paper. It's that's where even the biggest
Thank you. Thank you.
sports team, they flounder, and the people who are
Yeah.
actually there, who are good on that day, they win. How to be a leader who can be good on the day that there is trouble, who is not doing
Mhm.
troubleshooting by shooting down people, but actually shooting down the trouble itself.
Yeah.
What is it that these people lack? How can these people then get the right people for the job? What is it that is required here? You talk about leadership resilience, you talk about, a lot of other things that, that integrity, mental fortitude.
Mhm.
How do you bring that? Can you inject it like
Yeah.
anything and then they will get everything? Then, or do we send them back again to the ground, see some hardships and understand it?
Yeah.
How will
Yeah.
you bring all these things as a consultant, Previn? Because this is
So
where I think the problem is.
look, that's a really valid point, and I think you touched on something there which I want to expand on a bit about. Coming from the background that I come from, and living in South Africa. Being born and growing up in the apartheid era in South Africa. I saw firsthand, you know, the marginalization, for example, the racial discrimination, the hardships that people went through. I know about, the history of my people and what my grandparents went through. So when I look back on that, I think part of the leader's journey and being able to bring the right attributes is being able to reflect on the past and where you've come from. You have to know where you come from to know where you're going. That's the way I view it. So you have to understand your history and you have to understand how the people that have come before you have actually positioned you to be where you are. So as a leader, part of your journey is looking back at who has contributed to your journey as a leader, who has helped to shape your journey as a leader. How have they done that? And it doesn't have to be all positive. It can be people who've been a negative in your life, people who've hurt you, for example, but you always look at every situation as a learning, as a lesson, and you take the value out of that as a lesson and you apply it in your own life. So that's where I take it. I don't say I lived in apartheid, so it's something very negative and I will use that as a crutch, or I'm going to use that to dislike anybody or to complain or play a victim. You turn it into a positive attribute and you say, this is what I've been through. I will now, going forward, know what not to do to somebody else because I've suffered it myself. And I think that's part of it. Speaking about resilience, is you have to, as a leader, be able to show and demonstrate that you yourself have been through some tough times. You've been through some hard experiences. You've earned that leadership badge. It's not something that's just given to you. It's not something that you apply for and you just get it or you go and study it somewhere. And I think that's the difference between leadership and management, is that you find that management, in my opinion, is a science. It's something that you can study. You can go into a course, you can do an MBA, you can read a textbook, but leadership is an art form. And for me, leadership is composed of a myriad of different qualities. One of the big ones that I mentioned now is being able to reflect on where you've come from, to know where you're going, and also being able to take experiences from the past, positive and negative, and learn from them and apply the lessons going forward. And I think that's really important, because when you do that, you're able to relate to people on their level and also understand them as human beings and not just as resources.
Absolutely, Previn. Absolutely. And that is where it all comes down to, Pyromin Consulting. Are you able to talk about these things to leaders in the mining industry? What is their understanding of this thing? Do they listen to all these things, or do they want to come to the subject of profit first?
Look, it's one of the things that, and I really love that question and the fact that you asked that, because in some respects, I found that it is still a challenge, and people want to see the dollars first. They want to know, okay, what are you bringing in terms of cost savings, for example? What are you bringing in terms of increasing my recovery and throughput? But what I do is I used my LinkedIn as a platform. So I've got a really strong LinkedIn profile. I've got a fairly large network on there. And I use LinkedIn as a platform to send out my thought leadership and my message around these issues. Because when I go out to companies, the first thing I look to do is establish a relationship with the leadership that's there. And then slowly over time, once I've built that relationship, then open up these conversations around the difficult subjects, around the sticky subjects, around how do we actually assess our leadership approach to this project and how we are developing it. How do we put the right structure in place, for example? But I think it's a process, and my approach is to follow a roadmap, is to start from the small things and build up to the big things. I don't go in right from the start and start telling people what to do. That's not my philosophy. And I think part of that for me is around the word consulting. There's a stigma in the industry about the word consulting. And when you say consulting, people can tend to draw back a bit. They feel that you're coming there, for some negative reason. So that's why for me, it's really important that I establish the relationships with people first. And what I do through Pyramid Consulting is exactly that. I've been working on a project now for the past 6 months where I've done, aside from the work that I've been doing, I've been working on building relationships with people. I've been working on getting to know people on a personal level, getting to know people in terms of who are they outside of work, who are their families, what do they do outside of work. And that's my approach to do, because I'm playing a long game. I'm not looking, and I make this very clear, is that I didn't start Pyramid Consulting to just make profits. I'm not going to sites and just saying, I can do X, Y, and Z, and let me just make as much money as possible. I started this as a long-term thing. This is my goal and my vision. And that's why I take this approach, which is a longer process, but it's one that I believe will bear a lot of fruit in the long term, because I'm focused on building relationships with people rather than going in and just doing a piece of work.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Previn. You have the expertise, you have the skills, and you also have the experience in leading projects in politically and socially sensitive regions. And I'm sure there is a lot of learning that you can share there, a lot of things that you can put on the ground. So, for those people who would want to connect with you, learn more about you, learn more from you, learn about Pyromin Consulting, and how things can be actually done for the benefit of all, even if it's a different side
Sure.
or type of, ground that you dig. But for that, you have to dig first
Yeah.
deep into your ground, mental ground, and see
Yeah.
what efforts you have made. So, what is the best way for people to connect with you?
So the best way is through LinkedIn itself. That's where most of my connection to people takes place. That's where most of my lead generation happens, and that's where most of my work comes, is from LinkedIn itself. I think a large part of that is because, like I said, I've got a large network on LinkedIn. I've got a lot of people that I've worked with in the past that I'm connected to on LinkedIn. So anybody, I invite anybody from your audience, Ajay, and anybody who's listening to this, podcast and watches this afterwards, please reach out to me on LinkedIn. Feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy to have conversations with people, to introduce myself, to talk about their own concerns and thoughts, and share ideas and exchange ideas as well. I love doing that. And to touch a bit about what Pyramid Consulting does and what we've been doing, I take the approach of solving problems for people. So there's a lot of things that we can do. We operate in the space of operational excellence, process optimization, metallurgical projects, greenfield project development. So there's a number of areas that we operate in, but the key thing for us is to go in and address a person's problems. So we don't want to come in with a whole big project and scope something up and say, let's do something that's going to cost you a whole big packet of money. Our approach is, what is the low hanging fruit? Low hanging fruit meaning, what are the quick wins that we can get for you that shows you immediate impact, that shows you immediate return on your investment? That's our philosophy to doing things. That's my philosophy to doing things. And that's one of the things that I want to encourage your audience about is, anybody that's looking to get into this sort of space and this type of work, always have the mindset of adding value. That's the way I look at it. That's what I want to do, is add value to people. How can you solve problems for people? How can you give people value? That's the philosophy that I take.
Absolutely. With this, it's a wrap on this very special edition of the KAJ Masterclass Live. Thank you so much indeed for joining us.
Thank you.